this is Chris Schiffer. I started this forum last year, and the purpose of it was really to engage CPAs that have gone into private industry. Roughly half of CPAs that start out their career in public, they're in audit and tax, and then they find their way working in private industry in some form or fashion. We changed the name. Originally it was the CFO and Controllers Forum, but we thought it would be a good idea to integrate it better with the business and industry group. So we renamed it the Business and Industry Professionals Forum. So when you're looking for events like this in the future, look for that name. We were originally meeting in person once a month, and we basically moved that online in the middle of the crisis. So we've been doing this for a few weeks now, and we'll continue to do it weekly through the middle of June, and then hopefully by then things will be reopened, and we can go back to our regular monthly. Maybe we'll even do a bi-weekly. But when we get towards the middle of June, we'll shuffle the schedule around a little bit. So keep an eye out for that. Also, we do have another session this Friday at noon, managing a remote workforce. So another topic of interest, as I'm sure many businesses have been thrust into managing their employees remotely. So Howard and Laura will also be, our panels today will also be on that call. And also another FYI for all our professionals out there, we're working on a program for the rest of the year that will be CE eligible. These individual forums, if it's just a discussion, that's not CE eligible, but I'm going to be working on a whole program with Susan Dwyer on topics that will be CE eligible for this, specifically tailored for this group. So if you have an interest or a topic that's interest to you, that you want to learn more, please email me. My contact information is up on the screen. So without further ado, I'll kick off today's topic, best practices for returning to work. So there are many participants on the line, so I'm going to mute the line. We had 47 registered, but we're up to 17. So I'm just going to mute everyone all right now. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box. I'm just anticipating more people hopping on, and I don't want it to become like a free-for-all. So if you type it into the chat, I'll be moderating the questions as they come in. And also, just to mention, I distributed a resource guide to all the participants, 2 guides, one from NJCPA and one from Cushman & Wakefield. I thought they were pretty good. I also sent around a list of resources for reopening to all the participants. There are many people that registered in the last day or two. If you didn't get a copy, please email me. I'll happy to send you a copy of that resource guide. Okay, so the panelists for today, again, Chris Schiffer, moderating. I am a financial advisor with Wealth Enhancement Group, and we help individuals and businesses with their financial planning and investment management. Also with us, we have Howard Madelon. He's a partner at Oleander Feldman, in charge of the Employment Practices Group. So he has a wealth of knowledge. He's been doing this for 25 years, and he has a very different approach. He's not your typical employment attorney. If anything, he's very engaging with how we best utilize our most important, most costly resource, employees. And we also have Laura Crothers Osborne. She's the owner and principal and president of Crothers Consulting, boutique HR consulting and coaching firm, servicing middle market businesses. So I'll let Laura and Howard just kind of add a couple other thoughts about their practice, and then I'll kick it off with the first question. Howard, why don't we start with you?
So I've been practicing law for almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years in next year. And we have a very unique 360 practice at our firm, meaning we not only do all of the management side, consulting work and litigation defense on discrimination, sexual harassment, hostile work environment, but we also have an executive coaching practice where we help executives move from one business to another, either to bring them on board or to separate them from businesses. And we have learned an enormous amount about what's happening out there, both nationally and locally, in dealing with COVID. I think this is a very prescient time for business owners to be thinking about how they want to pivot both during the lockdown and after the lockdown. And those big decisions are right on your plates now for you and your clients. And it's a pleasure to be here, as always, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Appreciate it. And Laura, how about you share a little bit more about your practice?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I started this practice about 10 years ago after almost 20 years in large corporate HR. And we work with small and middle market clients on their people practices. And so similar to Howard, we tend to work with high growth business owners and help them really match their culture and their people practices. So we help them do things like design their compensation programs, commission plans, recognition and rewards, performance management. We do training for employees as well as for leaders. And we really just love what we do. So over the 10 years, my practice has grown to 15 employees. And we serve lots of middle market clients. Right now, in this time of COVID, we've created some free programs for clients to help their employees with the stress of this. We've also set up a free CEO call every Tuesday morning and a free HR leader call every Tuesday afternoon to help those folks really come together as a group and share what they're doing with each other. So I'll open that up if anybody is working for a middle market company and wants to join one of those calls or have your HR leader join us. Let us know. We found that to be really useful to share what everyone's doing. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Laura. All right. So I know we're all anxious to get back and reopen, and we're starting to see some of that, albeit slowly. But if anything, we have some time to prepare and get things in place ahead of time. So first question, what are my responsibilities to protect the health and safety of employees and clients if I'm planning to reopen? So, Howard, why don't we start with you?
Wow, that's a loaded question. There's an enormous amount of data that people need to come to grips with from, I'll let Laura address the HR side of this, but from a regulatory standpoint, you have to remember that we have a number of different laws that are all now intersecting. So you have OSHA and OSHA compliance and whether OSHA comes up with new guidance, which we're hoping for since they are the kind of the law of the land and have been largely silent, but there are documents to look at there, including OSHA 3990. You have the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, which provides for leave. And then you have a panoply of existing laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the New Jersey law against discrimination, and the Garden Variety Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. All of these laws are now kind of overlapping on one another and are creating a lot of uncertainty for a lot of business owners as to how to kind of navigate or guide themselves through the process. Kevin's question, the best way to find out all these laws, we have two presentations we've given before called Leverage the Lockdown that go through how all these laws intersect and overlap, and I'm happy to supply links to Chris for all of that. But you cannot operate alone anymore, and this is probably the most important takeaway. I'm sorry to say, because I'm the last person that likes to market or sell my own services or the services of other attorneys, but you have to. You have to get legally compliant. You can't do it alone. You have overlapping leave laws. You have New Jersey competing with the Coronavirus Relief Act. And now you have the bigger problem, which is accommodations. Accommodations used to only be talked about for businesses of 15 or more, in which an employee comes to you with a disability issue. For example, they hurt themselves, they have a pre-existing health condition, and that starts what's called an interactive process. And I'm not going to bore you guys with the details, but the long and short of it is, regardless of the size of your business, every business owner is now accommodating from employee one, because the New Jersey law against discrimination requires it, and because the Family's First Coronavirus Relief Act does. So employees coming to you, for example, with pre-existing medical conditions who are concerned about coming back to work, you need to figure out whether you can reasonably accommodate them. Employees who are terrified and tell you that they would rather you furlough them because they're home with childcare issues, you have to also accommodate them, and you have to allow them to seek refuge under the FFCRA. So there is an overwhelming amount of data that you all need to kind of come to grips with on behalf of your own businesses and the clients you serve, with how the laws overlapped and interact. And there is no way to do this in a very short period of time on this call, Chris, but they are all watchwords. You have to understand, for example, the new guidance you're going to have to provide about at-risk employees coming back to work, what kind of precautions you want to take, bringing people back to work, including they can now do self-health assessments where they certify to the company that on their way back to a physical operation that they haven't come into contact with anyone who has COVID, and they themselves do not have any symptoms of COVID. And then there's the whole panoply of things I'm sure Laura's going to go into with what you need to do within the workplace themselves to protect the employees from exposure issues.
Okay, Laura, about you, same question.
About me on this? So
from your perspective.
Yeah, so from my perspective, to add on to some of the things Howard said, is what we're suggesting employers do is to survey their employees, whether it's a Zoom, a Survey Monkey survey, or whether it's a small group and you can actually get on the phone and talk to everybody and find out what they're thinking. And so sometimes it's I've seen some clients, it's as simple as 3 questions. Are you working remotely effectively and efficiently and productively? Is working remote really good? Are you working remotely, most of the time pretty productive? I can make it work, but I really miss the social interaction. Or are you really struggling to work remote and you want to come back? So first, I'd say to everybody, assess your people and see where you are in that spectrum of bringing people back, depending upon what your business needs are, right? Obviously, if you're in a manufacturing plant, this isn't as much of an option than some professional services. And then once you have a handle on where your population stands, you can start making plans. And there's lots of providers out there now that are preparing the PPE equipment for you. There's workplace providers that are helping with, if you're going to open your office for customers, you want shields for the front desk, right? There's lots of those pieces, and signage, on the elevators, signage in the shared areas. So there's lots of ways that once you understand where your population's at and you make a plan for what you're going to do, that you can start to then prepare.
Okay, so that's a good segue to the next question, which is, where do I start? What resources do I need to provide to employees? Do I need to provide masks? You mentioned, Laura, you mentioned shields. Should I be providing those face shields? Do I need to do face shields, or is masks sufficient? Do I need hand sanitizer dispensers all over the office? What else should they be doing?
What else are you thinking of? So interesting enough, the IRS had their employees come back and they told them bring your own PPE, right? So I think at a minimum, we're saying people should have hand sanitizers available all over the office. at each desk if possible with Clorox wipes so people can wipe things down. And the PPE, you know, mix, sometimes it certainly you're controlling it more if you provide it, right? But there's other companies that are saying it's a cost we can't handle right now, and we're going to talk to employees about providing their own because they've all got it now anyway, right? You can't go into a store without it. So and the shields, I see a lot of people doing that. Is it mandatory? No. Is it a good practice to make people feel safe? Because at the end of the day, you want to help alleviate safety concerns for the people that are coming back into your office. And you want to do whatever you can to make them safe within your budget, and even have some of those open conversations about what would make you feel safe. Is it just the distancing? To some people, it's going to be, I don't want to be in the office at all. Is it 1 week on, 1 week off, so you can clean thoroughly in between? Is it every other day, right? There's lots of discussions going on, and not each workforce will be the same.
Howard, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, so, and I don't know, Chris, if you were going to go into kind of like the more 30,000 foot view about what you should be doing now and how you should be recommending things for the business, but talking about plans, I just saw Kevin's question. At a 30,000 foot view during the lockdown, the most important thing that the business owners need to do right now is actually reimagine what their businesses are going to look like post-COVID. That's the number one thing to do, because if you don't have an actual business plan, then how can you even think about bringing people back? You're going to have to begin a process of reimagining the roles that just about every single employee in the business has. You're going to have to do a census of your employees. What functions do they have? Revise all of their position descriptions to start. You're going to have to decide about how you're going to classify these employees. Are they coming back full-time salaried? Are they coming back hourly? Are you reclassifying them part-time? Those are just kind of the baseline. You're going to have to look at, for example, whether or not the business is structured in a hierarchical fashion, the way you see it on an org chart, and whether you need to start collapsing or consolidating the teams, right? Functions first, eliminate positions second. Once you have that in place, then you're going to have to start a process of creating return to work policies. And I want to introduce a concept that is fairly new to our profession, but you're going to hear a lot of, and that's the concept of reintegration. It's a mindset shift, right? We're not talking about onboarding, as onboarding is what you did already. We're talking about bringing people back to a new reality, okay? Reintegration means you're going to create a return to work plan. That return to work plan is going to have brand new policies with all the leave laws and all of the protocols. You may have to have training on health and safety, and you're going to wrap it all up in a bow in the form of a written acknowledgement where the employees all say, I took the training, I understand the new requirements, I have to have PPE, I understand I'm going to bring my own, I'm cleared to return to work. And if there are specific rules that you have within the business about social distancing or inviting customers to come in, etc., all of that is going to need to be in an acknowledgement, because there is a potential game-changing law that is in the process of being worked out in New Jersey that has already come into play in California. And everyone who knows Governor Murphy knows his vision for New Jersey is to become the right coast to the left coast of California. He has proposed a law that would actually, for a number of essential workers in businesses covering everything from food manufacturing and beverages to transportation and financial advisors and financial businesses, that any employee who comes into contact with another individual, a member of the public, in the course of their work, will now be treated as a workplace injury under workers' compensation. That bill has passed the state system, the Senate. There's enormous opposition from the business groups. Obviously, there's enormous opposition from the carriers about this. The good news, if there is any on this, is that the carriers can't increase your ratings, but they certainly can increase your premiums, right? And what we don't want to see, we hope, is that we're not going to see carriers discontinuing policies the same way that a number of carriers did when Obamacare came into existence. So these are things we're going to be monitoring very closely because the governor is expected to sign the law. And if you want, I can actually put up on my screen what it kind of looks like. But that's up to the members. I can provide it offline too.
Yeah. Well, the follow-on question to that would be, if that's going to be the presumption, wouldn't premiums go up across the board just based on the number of employees that you have, regardless of whether they're in the office or not?
Well, here's the interesting question, right? Because usually premiums are tied to ratings, right? Mm-hmm. So your rating goes up, your premium goes up. If the state forces the carriers not to change ratings due to COVID exposure, then how can they justify a premium extension? And by the way, for those of you who have started forming new businesses, I'll share something new that just came to my knowledge, which is those providing CGL policies are now including COVID exceptions. So your clients will now need to get riders with, I'm sure, jacked up premiums associated with COVID. Now, here's the funny thing. COVID is typically not a CGL issue. It would be an issue more against your business interruption policy, which, as probably all of you know, is also a whole other subject of litigation right now over whether COVID is part of business interruption insurance. The carriers are going to be desperate to push COVID away from all their policies through exceptions. That's going to happen.
Wow. That's a lot to think about. And I guess reimagining the business aside and assuming that we need to bring employees back into the office and maybe we do it in shifts. But when we do bring them back, should we be keeping a log? You mentioned, Howard, an acknowledgement that they haven't been in contact with anybody with COVID. Should that be incorporated as a best practice? And what happens if we don't? Is that state mandated, or is that just going to be a presumption of negligence if a business doesn't have something like that for contact tracing?
Well, it's interesting, as I say, that this acknowledgement form, what we're trying to accomplish with it also is to hold the employees accountable in the event that it does become a workers' comp issue, and then the carrier may not be able to defend itself against the claim as a work-related injury, but it may be able to defend the company by using negligence, by introducing the worker's own negligence as an issue. I will tell you that, yes, the companies themselves have serious exposure for not introducing these new workforce reintegration policies. Everyone is going to probably mandate on a federal and state level PPE, although ironically, we're not sure whether or not it actually protects against anything, right? I had this interesting question at a forum yesterday about a manufacturer who had an assembly line where he could not keep 6 feet between each worker. And I said, well, let's put the plexiglass up. But if you've been to the supermarket lately to see the poor clerk behind that plexiglass shield, unless you put them in a giant box and pumped in oxygen, there's no way that protects them against anything. It really is more cosmetics, but those cosmetics are actually going to count. They really are. You've got terrified workers who are coming back, and somehow everyone's been led to believe, by the way, that the lockdown was intended to kill the virus. It was never intended to kill the virus. It hasn't even accomplished the slowdown in the growth pattern for the most part. All it's done is suspended or abated the number of new case escalations, which is going to go right back up when people start coming into contact with one another and stop following protocols. It's going to happen. There's no question about it. So what you have to do as a business owner is not be part of the problem. And as you said very well, all those protocols are going to need to be in place, right? You're going to need to send customers to, you're going to need to send employees to work sites, right? If you're an architect, you're not going to be able to supervise this from afar. You got to be kidding me. You're going to have to be on the work site, right? So you have to handle delicately with the customer what their protocols are to make sure, A, you don't offend them, which is probably from the business perspective the most important, but B, how you protect your own workers from that problem. I really don't think, and I'm sure Laura shares my opinion, people do not understand the enormity of the change, right? They just think we're going to kind of come back and we're going to sanitize and everything will be fine. We are becoming our own OSHA self-governing businesses now. That will forever be part of our new normal. We will all be in our own way OSHA and EEOC compliant, Department of Labor compliant on a federal level for the rest of our businesses' natural lives, regardless of this COVID thing. We are now going to have to make that part of the DNA of the business, like every other policy the business has.
You know,
Wow. Go ahead, Laura.
yeah, I mean, I think to talk about some of your practices to bring back. So obviously I agree with Howard that getting people to acknowledge in writing what you've told them and what your expectation of them is clearly important. And I see one question here, am I responsible to test employees or visitors? There's a lot of apps that have been created now that allow employees to self-test that most of the companies I know are looking into so that you're not responsible for the thermometer at the desk, testing them and putting it in a log, but you have them self-test every day on an app. United Healthcare has one that I know a lot of people have been interested in. So I'll give you a list of some apps to look at. And are you responsible for testing visitors that come in? You know, I think the answer that I've heard from everybody is in some way you need to certify that those visitors have also gone through a protocol and that you're keeping your employees safe. Because again, this is all about keeping them as safe as you can. And so you need to figure out how you're going to test visitors. I have seen a lot of people are buying those temperature strips and asking visitors to fill out a questionnaire and then do a temperature strip so that they can tell the employees they did go through some protocol before they entered our office. And there's usually a piece of the office that might be blocked off for visitors so they're not wandering throughout the whole office, but they're contained. So, you know, I know that that is a piece of it as well as how do you test employees and test visitors. So these apps seem to be a better idea unless you're a big enough company that you can have a nurse or someone provide the test and the questionnaires at the front and manage to keep it confidential for HIPAA reasons.
Right. So aside from the master plan for reopening, so to speak, it sounds like the bare bones minimum or the essential is to have that log of who's coming into the office, having some form of acknowledgement both for employees and visitors, whether they're clients or even the mail person. And what about the workspace itself? Howard, you mentioned the manufacturer and it's less than 6 feet and putting up the plexiglass. What about, the cubicles, they're facing each other, they're T-bone structure. What do we need to do with that?
Right. So there's a lot of overlap here between how Laura and I would probably answer this. So this is what I would say to you on those fronts. You're probably going to have to start considering restructuring and changing the way that the workplace operates. For example, let's talk more basics. We don't want people aggregating or congregating together in confined spaces. So I think the days of maintaining the coffee in the kitchen are over for the time being, right? Let people bring their stuff into the office from outside if possible. The idea of that kind of collective microwave or the refrigerator, you want to start thinking about those basic ideas, right? Are people going to really wipe things down every day? The idea of people self-policing their temperatures has become a real issue because you're allowed to, under the EEOC rules, to mandate temperature checks. But every step you take is one more invasive process for the employee, one more kind of, oh my God, I can't even get through my day without somebody coming into my office and saying, put your mask higher, it's not hot, you know. So you need to be thinking about the practical as well as what you need from a procedural standpoint. But as to your specific question about like the workspace itself, you may now need to, and a number of my clients have already started reconfiguring those workspaces, right? Go in there, start getting rid of cubicles back to back to back. Maybe some people have worked out in a virtual context. Maybe you need to do staggered shifts of people coming back, particularly in the short term. And I'm talking, you know, the next 6 days, because look, the governor has begun to realize, as humorously he starts to secretly and desperately look for funding for state employees and operations, has been secretly trying to get as many businesses back to work as he can get away with. And he announced a new stage plan of three stages to come back. We already have auto dealers back online, right? We're going to quietly, this is going to be a quiet return to work process. So what you want to do is, anticipating that you may get back to work earlier than you thought, you want to get people into your workspaces now to start moving things around and making people more comfortable with processes. Absolutely.
So at a minimum, it's that 6 feet. And if you have to move, even if you keep your current cubicles structured, you know, we have an empty cubicle in between, whether it's a permanently empty cubicle or staggering the workforce so that that person in that in-between cubicle is coming in on a different day, so that you're always maintaining that at least that 6 feet.
Yeah, and Laura, if you want to jump in on that one, I didn't want to follow up.
Yeah, I mean, the same, yes, Chris, that's right. A lot of people are talking about if they have pods of cubes, they're having the two people opposite each other come in on, you know, one day or 1 week tends to be even more preferred, because then you can really sanitize down in between, unless you've got a cleaning crew coming in every night, right? So come in for a week if you're in these corners, and then the next corners come in the next week. And talking about reconfiguring, sometimes a lot of these cubicles are simple put together Legos, and there's easy ways to reconfigure them and take a look at your workspace. And a lot of the furniture dealers out there are giving free evaluations now on how to reconfigure with your existing equipment.
Gotcha. Okay, and you kind of touched on a couple things, so I'll address them. I see some other questions coming in, so we'll get to all the questions, but I guess the follow-on to that is, okay, so we maintain socially distance, we close the common, you know, coffee/lunchroom, so basically telling people to bring their own lunch and their own coffee. And what about the copier or the scanner where everyone's congregating? Should there be a protocol around, you know, okay, you can't wait to the end of the day since there's a lot of people in there. What's the protocol about, you know, keeping the copy room clean? Or what about a common restroom area? And then that kind of gets into the, well, what should we be talking to a landlord about in terms of disinfecting and cleaning?
Right. You know, and I think some of this, Chris, comes down to the type of business you run and the type of employees you have. And so, you know, part of my philosophy is you treat people like adults until they prove they need to be treated differently. So for some of this, even the coffee room, some of the clients we're talking to, they're saying to people, you know, only one person in at a time. And if you go to get coffee and they're using pods, not a big open pot, and you see that someone else is in there, you stand outside and you wait until they come out, and then you go in and get yours, and you know, you can wipe down in between. And so the same thing, there's signage that you can buy now that talks about that. There's signage that you can put on the floors to keep people spaced out. And so you can think through, you know, just how big is your workforce, where do they normally congregate, and how can you set up practices with them that they can follow. You know, in general, adults we've all been living in this, right? We all go to the store and we walk on past and we move away from people, so people can do that in the workforce too. And you just need to provide them with some guidance around what your expectations are so that they're thoughtful about it. right? So with the
Yep.
restrooms and with the elevator is another one. There's signage on the elevators, right? No more than 2 people in the elevator, depending upon the size. No more, people will be taking stairs, but you don't want 20 people in the staircase at the same time if you're only up 1 floor, right? So people are going to need to respect the kind of one at a time rule.
Right. Okay. Well, that kind of is a great segue to the next question, which is, what do you do with the employees who are bad actors and they're like, I'm not wearing the mask, or I'm not, this is whatever. What do you do with those people who are not complying with the procedures that have been laid out?
I think Howard talked about you're setting a new practice and you're asking them
That's
to
right.
sign off that they acknowledge this new practice for your workplace. Just like any other practice, it would be a disciplinary problem. So if they're not following your practice, whatever that is, from other safety procedures in your, in your workforce, your distribution, to these new now COVID safety procedures, it would be treated like any other disciplinary thing. You would ask them to put on their mask and tell them this is a warning. They need to keep it on the workplace. And if they didn't or they refused, they could be subject to disciplinary action up through termination. Howard, you agree with me here?
I could not have possibly said it better.
We're in line on that one. Yeah.
Right. I think that's going to be a challenge because, tell me what you think, but I think in my experience, it's been like the taboo. You don't ask employees about their health. You don't get in their personal space unless you really have to. But I guess, I'm thinking the biggest new normal is you have to fill out this acknowledgement form before you come in, saying you don't have COVID, you haven't been exposed with anybody with COVID, and you're going to follow these new practices and procedures.
That's right.
But enforcing it, and then, well, wait a minute, you said you filled out that acknowledgement, but you're coughing a lot. Are you okay? Maybe you have COVID. You should go home. I don't think that's really something we as coworkers or employees really have done in the past. So, do you care to comment on that a little bit?
Oh, like I said, it's the new normal or the wild, wild west, right? We're in uncharted territories, ladies and gentlemen. We are now regulating and policing the health and wellness of our own employees one way or another. We're not being invasive. We're not violating HIPAA. But what we're basically doing is avoiding the possibility that one recalcitrant employee infects the entire workplace. And we talk about cost, Chris. Let's compare the cost ratio. So what is the cost of sending someone home and spending a couple hours dealing with that versus having to resanitize the office and sending everyone home from a COVID exposure problem, right? And remember, there's going to have to be a lot of sensitivity early on. Some people may forget and become careless with their masks, or they cough on someone. Some of the employees jump, and run out the door. I mean, everyone is going to have to be very relaxed and flexible in the next 60 days when people start to come back, right?
Yeah.
Messaging, communication, kind of diligence, but not, knocking on someone's door and saying, just wanted to check in and make sure you're wearing your mask, right? And then making practical policies, right? There's no need to wear your mask if you're in your own, office, right, space, and there's nobody else in there. And let me tell you, that issue with the kind of masks, I don't know about any of you, but I've tried to talk and wear one of those N95s, and I feel like I'm going to fall unconscious, right? So, you may literally need to have people wear the cloth mask and other kinds of masks, because really what it's intended to do is to prevent someone from actually breathing on other people rather than other people breathing on them. I mean, you can wear that mask all day long and still get COVID exposure on your face. I mean, it's a prophylactic that is not necessarily proof of anything. You're just doing it to give the employees a sense of safety, not an absolute guarantee or protection. You're making no reps about that, that's for sure.
Right. And I think that's why the apps are really nice, because people can certify, you get the log that everybody's certified. If they come in and they haven't done it, when they scan in, it will say they haven't filled out their app yet. You can say, hey, you forgot. Could you please go online, fill it out, before you come in. And as Howard mentioned, giving people a little grace right now, that's kind of been my word through this, is you don't know where people are on the roller coaster of any given day, where their family is, their own personal health, their mental health, and giving people a little grace as they come back. One of the things we're recommending about that specific cough issue that you have, Chris, that's been brought up a lot. People have allergies right now. They're coughing, they're sneezing. What I'm saying to clients is, look, if you're having people come back in the office and you've got a lot of nervous people, although the nervous people are usually not stage 1 to come back, but if you have allergies and you're coughing and sneezing, you need to work from home, because it's just going to scare people. Even though it might not be nothing wrong, there's a fear factor right now. And you know what? Any adult, any of you on this call go, yep, I get that. So if you have bad allergies, please work from home, because people are going to be fearful. And so I think it's just some simple adult conversations with people and saying, and if you're not sure what you should do, call, let's talk about it.
Right.
At the same time, what you don't want to do is you don't want to force these employees to feel like they need to check in with you if they think they've got the COVID symptoms, right? They come in, they're not kind of feeling good, they have a headache, and go home. Don't ask for permission. Go home. Just go home. We'll deal with it then. I know there were a couple of follow-up questions on these areas.
Well, it sounds like communications is critical, because it's also another mind shift where I think it's been kind of in American culture, like, okay, I got the sniffles. I'm gonna go into work. I'm gonna, take care of business, etc. And maybe even peer pressure to do so. Then that, now we're kind of flipping it around and saying, no, if you're sick, stay home. And you hear many employers saying, okay, well, you don't worry about getting paid or using up all your sick days. If you're sick, stay home. Period. The end.
Absolutely.
Comments on that?
No, you're accurate, Chris.
And that's spot on guidance. And what you have to be careful. On the one hand, you want to let the employees self-govern their way out. On the other hand, you don't want to be attempting to micromanage them on their way in or way out. So if someone has COVID or thinks they have COVID, let them self-quarantine for 2 weeks, right? Better to be safe than sorry, and we could deal with all the, earned sick time and the Coronavirus Relief Act and all those things. If they think they have the symptoms, they should be home. They should be home resting. If they can work from home, great. If they can't, they say, I can't work from home, it's leave. It's automatic leave. Just put them on leave. That's it.
And I guess another question on reopening. So, Laura, you alluded to, you've actually both alluded to, employees might be afraid to come back, or there's a daycare issue or whatnot. Do you recommend having maybe a voluntary, first wave of people going back, and that's who comes back to the office, and kind of do it in stages rather than try to have all the employees come back on the same day, or
that was my part on the survey, right? And so to kind of figure out where people are, but some of it's going to be a business decision too. If you have the ability to have people come back in stages, clearly let them come back if they're the ones saying, I'm really struggling being productive at home. I've got, there's 2 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City with a dog. Like, I can't get anything done, right? Or my little kids are here and I want to come back to the office. So those are the people that are going to really follow protocol as well, because they're wanting to get back to that kind of structure and they're not productive. If you have people who are saying, I'm very productive at home, and you're witnessing that they're very productive, right? You're tracking their work and they're very productive, and they're saying, and I'm scared, I'd let them be a later stage. Let them get through the fear.
Right. I guess it also makes it easier for the people who are fearful, if it's 2 weeks have elapsed and the office has been open and people have been coming in, and they may even be communicating with the coworkers that are working from the office.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And the clients that we're dealing with now, we were just on a call, yesterday and they have, some are set to come back in a different state in Michigan, the end of May. And we have other people that have already said, we're not coming back to the office till 2021. So folks are they're making different plans for their business, depending upon what type of business they have and what they're hearing from their employees about their level of productivity remotely.
Right. And let's remember, just from a business perspective, you need to think about whether you're bringing people back and how anyway, right? So you're going to want to start quantifying the essential person versus the non-essential person, because you want to make sure that you're bringing them back in an objective, non-discriminatory way, right? In the same way that what you wouldn't want to do is say, well, management can still stay home, but we're going to make all the workers go back and expose them to COVID, right? There's a lot of things you need to do. Yeah. So Kevin, what I would say is this: we're now at the point where we need, I don't know if we want to say a chief health officer for a major business maybe, but what we really need to do is we need to broaden and expand both the span of authority and control for HR. You need to do that. This should naturally fall within the ambit of human resources. But if you do have anyone on board who also has like a healthcare background, particularly if you are operating in the healthcare field, absolutely. Having someone in who is involved with what we'll call, preparedness, planning, hygiene, health, safety, and welfare, that's the person that all of this needs to fall on. And the business has to give them a lot of rope to get their head around this, to figure out what the plan is, and to have management look at the plan and make it then part of the operations of the business going forward. I mean, look, whether 2021 is a better year or not, most of the laws are by definition in place until the end of the year. So that's a minimum of how long we're going to be dealing with this. And COVID supposedly can come back. So that's it.
Yeah. And like Howard was saying, we suggest even having a committee with one person like that leading the committee, but having a committee so you're getting input from maybe that fearful person, right? And you're getting input from maybe somebody on the totally opposite end that just wants to come back, and helping to hear all the points of view as you start to structure it. And then they'll also help you think of other things that you might need to clarify that you wouldn't have thought you needed to. Right. So as you get questions from this committee, you're like, oh, okay, we need to put a little more definition around this, or maybe we should talk about this one in a conference call because this is an area where there seems to be a lot of gray. Right. And that committee will help you figure that out.
That's a good thought. Yeah. Thanks. All right. We have about 7 minutes left, and I have an important question that no one's asked yet. I'm surprised. But it's actually, it'd be interesting to hear both your perspectives. So after we've done all these procedures, what if somebody comes into the office and they find out that we send them home, we find out, they come back and they say, I've been diagnosed with COVID. What do we do?
Well, from a legal standpoint, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do your own disclosures. And it's a funny problem, right? If you have a 2 or 3 person operation and you say to me, well, Howard, I don't want to disclose a person's name. Well, it's an obvious problem, right? As opposed to a business with, 5 divisions, et cetera, where you'd want to then say an employee was exposed in our scientific laboratory division. And we're going to recommend that everyone in that division go out and get tested for COVID, right? And by the way, for those of you who have been following, we're not even sure that getting antibody tested is actually safe. There's been a lot of fake news out there as to whether it means that you cannot contract it. There are reports of Navy sailors coming back with the same COVID. It may be a different strain, and that tells us that antibodies mean nothing right now. So when you have somebody who potentially is exposed, you send them home, you tell them to immediately get tested so we know whether they have it, because the best prophylactic is to find out they don't have COVID, in which case the exposure is a non-issue. But at the same time, you want to alert everyone else. We had someone in the office today, he or she created an exposure issue. We're recommending that everyone go home and get tested because of the problem with identifying them. I think what will eventually happen from a tracing perspective is the EEOC is going to allow individuals to identify the person just so they can find it if they've come into contact with the person.
Right.
The other way of handling it is if you know who the person is and who they may have been exposed to, you can quietly identify the group of 8 or 10 or 12 within a workplace who may have been in that day, right? You could do it by day and say, you should all go out and get tested. So variety of different options available.
So that's the sticky question. Everyone's has it ingrained in them. Thou shalt not ask any questions about health for fear of violating HIPAA. And now contact tracing is being pushed. So you have a person who's diagnosed with COVID or may have been exposed to COVID. All right, great. We've done the contact tracing. We have the log in the office. But wait, we can't disclose the name. And that's probably the first question you get. You say, oh, there's been somebody in the office or the workplace that's been exposed to COVID. We recommend you get tested. The first question they're going to ask is, who was it? So I know whether, typically in my office, but who was it? Because I need to know whether I was in contact with them. What do you do? What do you say? What can you say?
So interesting, the one thing, and Howard, you may have a different opinion on this, but the way I've talked about this with folks is depending upon the size of your companies. I mean, a lot of us on this call are running smaller companies and everybody knows each other. And so the person who gets COVID and discloses to you, right, I have COVID, one of the first questions I'd say to them is, who did you come in contact with? And are you comfortable sharing that you have COVID with folks? Because the answer for a lot of people, like 50%, is probably going to be like, sure, you can tell people it was me so they can think if they came in contact with me. They're going to be okay. So I think some of this, it goes back to adult common sense. Ask the person. You don't tell Howard has COVID if Howard's not okay with it. But if Howard says, yeah, I want people to know because I might not think of everybody I was in contact with, and I want to make sure people get tested if they know I have it, right? It's a little different than the stigma people had with AIDS. And,
right,
I think
or something else, right? Whether
I think people are disclosing. I run a couple WPO groups, and we got on the call one day, and 2 of the women on the call were like, "Hey, I've got COVID. I've got it. My family's like, people are getting it, and they're getting well." And so I think people in general want to help others, and they want to say, hey, I have it. If I was in contact with you, make sure you get checked. Don't think it's allergies.
And on the same topic, I mean, let's talk about the Captain Obvious problem. So you sent in a memo that says someone was infected with COVID or thinks they may have been in contact with it, and that day you find out that Bob went home early. I mean, it's going to be, one of those super obvious problems. And it is not, look, there is no stigma associated with it. Everything is ultimately going to be relaxed and in the wash. And God forbid this particular person files suit or makes a claim. What's the remedy? What's the problem? What court in the universe to say, well, you really shouldn't have gone around and told everybody because, I mean, it's a health, safety, or wellness issue that affects other people. It's the same problem that you have an infectious disease in the office, right? It's going to be a manageable issue. I don't really think this is a tail wagging the dog as far as I'm concerned. No one is really going to be suing over being identified as potentially having it at all.
Right. Okay. And there's a follow-on question from Kathy. Have some of the HIPAA regulations been waived during the pandemic, or is it just healthcare organizations? And Howard, you alluded to the EEOC hasn't been caught up yet, and they're probably going to relax some of the guidelines, but you get a comment on that.
We've already seen the guide. Look, the EEOC, for whatever reason, has taken the field. And those organizations that we anticipated, like OSHA, that would be all over this, have not. I think there must have been an administrative decision at the White House that the point person really should be employment rather than health and well-being. And that's why you're seeing the EEOC and the Department of Labor being out in the forefront. I am not aware that there have been specific HIPAA regulations that have been waived from an identification standpoint. Obviously, there have been some implicit waivers, the fact that you can take temperature and other things, and you can disclose that someone within the workplace has this condition, and it will ultimately come out. So I think what they've decided, in the same way that the EEOC has relaxed standards about reasonable accommodation in case, for example, it presents an enormous hardship to the business. A person says, well, I can come back to work, but to come back to work, I need everyone else in the business to be out, right? Those kind of accommodations that the business could not possibly grant. The EEOC has said at this particular time, they are the most sympathetic they will ever be to a business and a business owner who's coming to grips with the costs associated with the accommodations. So assume for the moment that we are dealing with practical guidance when it comes to bringing people back within reason, as opposed to medical leave laws or other things that absolutely have to be followed, right? Every business is going to be situational, every single one.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're up at the end of the hour here, a little bit over. Thank you, everybody, for attending. You have Howard and Laura's contact information up on the screen the whole time. Please reach out to them if you have any follow-up questions. Also, remember we have the session on Friday about managing a remote workforce. And if you have interest in any topics for the future, please email me those topics so I can incorporate them into the schedule. Thank you so much for attending. Everyone have a great day.